Back in the 1960s, there was not much of a coffee culture in America. Coffee drinkers often had to take in low-grade, inexpensive coffee scooped out of a can. If a person desired a much fresher alternative, they would have to buy the beans. But even these were mostly old, stale, and harsh. However, a single trip to Europe by one man was about to change all of that.
Who would have believed that Americans would line up by the millions to pay $4 for a cup of coffee?
Starbucks! One day, every house in America will have their own private plumbing to Starbucks.
When I walked in this store for the first time, I knew I was home. President, Chairman, and Chief Executive of Starbucks, Howard Shultz.
This man's family foundation has committed $30 million to help veterans manage the challenges of successfully transitioning into the civilian workforce.
My company, over the last 30 years, the only company in America that gave comprehensive health insurance, equity in the form of stock options, and free college tuition.
Before Howard Shultz came to the picture, Starbucks was founded by Bowker and his two friends, Baldwin and siegl. In 1962, Bowker, who was a San Francisco University student at the time, had a trip to Europe. One day, he ordered a cappuccino at a café in Rome. He was immediately blown away by the taste, as it was different and more astonishing compared to the low-grade coffee he was accustomed to in America. When he got back from his trip, he dropped out of the university and moved out to his hometown in Seattle. The thing is, after his trip from Europe, he developed a taste for high-grade coffee. But unfortunately, there was none in Seattle at the time. The only place he could find something close to what he had in Rome was in Vancouver, British Columbia. So Gordon developed a habit of driving from Seattle to Vancouver every now and then to a coffee and tea company called Mochis, which sold roasted coffee beans. Having shared some with his friends, they also got hooked, and before long, they were placing orders with him. Then the idea struck him. Why not start a coffee business in Seattle? His two friends, Baldwin and siegl, liked the idea. So the three men agreed to go into business together as partners. Siegl took it upon himself to find the partners a mentor. Eventually, he met Alfred Pitt, the man who will go down in history as the Dutchman who taught America how to drink coffee. He roasted his coffee dark the European way, in a way that brings out the full flavors of the beans. Alfred also agreed to supply their fledgling business with fresh roasted coffee beans. Meanwhile, in Seattle, the partners had found the location they wanted, just north of Park Place Market, with the rent starting at $137.50. As for the start of funding, they took out a bank loan of $5,000 and brought out $1,500 each. On the 30th of March 1971, the first Starbucks store went into business. The three men had little business experience and hardly any cash, but they were confident that once the Atlas discovered what a great cup of coffee tasted like, they'd be hooked. And boy, they were right. Now, if you ask most people today who the founder of Starbucks is, they'll probably say it's Howard Shultz. But having gone through the first chapter of this video, we all know that not to be true. In fact, Starbucks already had about 4 stores when it caught the attention of Howard Shultz. Howard was born on the 19th of July 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. His Jewish parents were both high school dropouts. His early years in life were tough.
If I took you from where I grew up, in the housing projects of Brooklyn, to this stage,
you'd say it's impossible that someone could come from there and get here.
But one of his toughest experiences growing up by far was when he got home one day only to find his father laying on the couch with a cast from his hip to his ankle after being injured on his job.
My father was a World War II veteran, came home, didn't take advantage of the GI Bill, and was just an uneducated laborer and had a series of very bad jobs.
His father fell on a sheet of ice and broke his ankle. As a result, he was laid off his job with no workman's compensation, no severance, and no health insurance. At that moment, all hope was lost. However, his mother encouraged him to pursue an education in order to open up more doors for himself. Unable to get an athletic scholarship from the Northern Michigan University, Howard took up student loans and a number of odd jobs to get through school. He even had to sell his own blood a couple of times. He graduated from the Northern Michigan University in 1975 with a bachelor's in communication. After his graduation, he stayed in Michigan and worked in a ski lodge for a year. He then took up a job in New York as Xerox sales program, where he became a successful salesman. Eventually, he was recruited by a Swedish company that sells kitchen equipment and housewares. With time, his powerful work ethic took him to the position of vice president. One day, Howard noticed a small retailer by the name Starbucks placing orders for a drip cup coffee maker in larger quantities than the world's largest apartment stores. So he decided to visit the original store in Park Place Market.
When I walked in this store for the first time, I know this sounds really hokey, I knew I was home.
At the time, Starbucks only sells coffee beans, but they also offer tasting samples as a way to get people engaged with the business. So anybody who visits their store will be offered tasting samples in order to increase their chances of becoming customers. It was a powerful marketing strategy. Howard tried a sample and he was immediately blown away by the taste. On the plane back to New York, he could not stop thinking about Starbucks. So he reached out to the partners and asked if there's any way he could join the team. Baldwin and Bowker agreed to have dinner with him at the restaurant Donatello in San Francisco. Howard wore one of his best suits to the meeting, as a way to make his case to the more casual dressed Starbucks board of directors, comprising of Baldwin, Bowker and their business consultant Steve Donovan. Howard thought he had charmed them with his youthful enthusiasm and energy. He was sure that he would be flying back to New York with an offer in his hand. But their final decision was against him. He was shocked and devastated. However, he refused to take no for an answer. He called Baldwin on the phone and told him that he was making a terrible mistake. It took a whole year of consistent persuasion, but Baldwin finally called Howard to tell him that he's got the job and ask him when he will come to Seattle and start working. Flash forward to 1983, Howard has been in Starbucks for about a year and is now their marketing director. He was sent to represent Starbucks at a week-long international houseware show in Milan. During the show, he noticed several espresso bars, but most important of all, he was so impressed by the community that was put together under the love of coffee. The baristas know their customers by name and call them when their drink is ready. He saw how coffee shops provided meeting places for the residents and served as halls where all kinds of debates take place over a cup of hot, delicious coffee. It was perfect. As he watched, he had a revelation. He thought, this has to be the next phase for Starbucks. He took a train to Verona and mimicked someone else's coffee order. He was so blown away by the taste that he thought to himself, no one in America knows about this. I have got to take it with me. He returned to Seattle and told his bosses about the experience. But unfortunately, he was seen as an overexcited marketing director. They put in the argument that Starbucks was a retailer and not a restaurant or a bar. In 1984, Starbucks acquired Peet's. However, the acquisition left them deeply in debt and deprived them of trying on new ideas. Meanwhile, Howard kept on trying to convince Baldwin to try out an espresso bar. It took about a year before Baldwin finally agreed to consider the idea at Starbucks' 6th store in downtown Seattle. And the store was a success. But Baldwin thought that the success of that store was wrong and felt like they were too deeply in debt to continue. This left Howard depressed for months. He was torn between his loyalty for Starbucks and his vision for Italian espresso bars. Around that time, Howard went to a downtown athletic club to play basketball. There he met a young lawyer named Scott Greenberg. The two men occasionally meet each other over for beers. Over time, Howard shared some of his frustrations with Scott. He told Scott that he was thinking about going independent. Scott thought it was a good idea and that investors might be interested. As fate would have it, one thing led to another, and sure enough, by 1985, Howard left Starbucks to start his own company by the name Il Giornale. He had no idea at the time that he would be back at Starbucks soon enough, but the next time as the owner, not an employee. Il Giornale is the Italian word for newspaper. When Howard was planning on how to approach investors for funding his new farm business, he was surprised by Baldwin. Baldwin called him into his office one day and offered to invest $150,000 of Starbucks' money. He was off to a great start. With his former employer's support, Howard thought he could attract all the money and support he needed within 6 months. In fact, Howard and Gordon even flew to Italy together to research coffee bars and meet up with Femi, a producer of espresso machines in Milan. He was expecting to return to Seattle with $1 million investment in his hand, but he was turned down by Femi because they thought Americans could never enjoy coffee the way Italians do. Back in America, Howard spent most of his time finding new investors and racing from one meeting to another. He told investors that his plan was to invent a commodity. Most of the investors he managed to approach saw high-tech as a more appealing industry, while others even told him to his face that he was selling a crazy idea. Over the span of 1 year, Howard spoke to 242 people, and 217 of them said no. But he remained persistent, and sure enough, by April of 1986, Howard finally opened the first store. In 1987, Howard's luck got even better. The founders decided to sell Starbucks for $3.8 million in order to focus all their attention on Peet's. Finally, he was about to have it all. But there were two problems. Howard at the time did not have any money, and one of his Il Giornale investors liked the idea of owning Starbucks for himself so much so that he planned on cutting Howard out of the deal completely.
Now, here's the issue. This guy was a titan in Seattle. So that night, I told my friend, who was a young lawyer, exactly what I just told you, and he says to me, come to our office tomorrow morning and meet our senior partner. And I said, okay, who is it? And he said, Bill Gates Sr. And I walk into his office and he says, we're going to go for a walk. And we literally walked across the street and we walked into the guy's office. Bill Gates, all 6'7", 6'8", towers over his desk and says, you should be ashamed of yourself. This is not going to go down. You are going to stand down, and this kid is going to realize his dream.
Howard kept on meeting with more investors, and within weeks, he managed to raise the $3.8 million he needed for the purchase. With that, on the 18th of August 1987, the modern Starbucks was born. Upon taking over Starbucks and merging it with Il Giornale, Howard's robust vision to take coffee back into the mind of America began to take shape. He wanted to turn Starbucks into more than just a coffee place, but into a cultural experience as well. First in Seattle, then throughout the States, and then the world. That same year, Starbucks opened its first location outside of Seattle in Vancouver and Chicago. Howard wasted little time gearing up for expansion. Under his leadership as the CEO, he hired top-tier managers and pushed to grow into new markets as quickly as possible. Thus, within just 5 years, Starbucks had grown to 140 locations. Their revenue went from $1.3 million in 1987 to $73.5 million in 1992. They were roasting more than 6 million pounds of coffee every year. That same year, Howard decided to take the company public. With shares priced at $17 apiece, they successfully raised $25 million while only offering 12% of the company. This gave them immense capital for further expansion. Within just 2 years after going public, the company's store count had tripled. Their growth was exponential, opening 2 new locations every day. By 1996, Starbucks had opened its 1,000th store and debuted its first location outside of the United States in Tokyo, Japan. 3 years later, the number of stores had doubled again, with a total store count of 2,500. Aside from opening up new stores consistently, Howard also focused on maintaining consistency. If you walk into a Starbucks store today, whether it's in the United Kingdom or in India, you can expect to find the same great tasting coffee. Howard also focused on creating a work environment that his father never got a chance to work in. To that end, Starbucks calls its employees partners and prides itself in offering both full and part-time comprehensive benefits for its partners. Thus, in just 13 years, Howard had not only successfully created a coffee culture in America, but also changed how Americans view coffee. After realizing his vision, he stepped down as the Chief Executive Officer of Starbucks on the 1st of June 2000 to focus his attention mainly on expansion as the Chief Global Strategist. However, with the new management, Starbucks will get lost at sea. The new management focused all its attention on expansion, and thus from 2000 to 2007, the number of stores grew 4 times in just 7 years, adding over 4 new locations every day. During this period of rapid growth and expansion, Starbucks' stock price tripled, held by the booming economy of the time. But as it will turn out, this rapid growth was masking a hideous problem.
We were measuring and rewarding the wrong things, and one of them was transaction speed. And we're not in the transaction speed business. We're in the business, literally, of enhancing people's day by producing the world's best coffee.
The new management prioritized profit over product quality and customer experience, which sacrificed the core values that were instituted by Howard. Fully automated espresso machines that pump out lattes like an assembly line were introduced. While they saved time, they were killing the experience. And as drive-thrus replaced the feeling of community, Starbucks seemed to be losing its touch. In addition, there is the global financial crisis of 2008, which caused the company's stock prices tanking. In an effort to save the coffee giant, the company once again turned to Howard to save the day. He returned back as the CEO on the 8th of January 2008. His early tasks included shutting down hundreds of stores worldwide that weren't making any profit and firing numerous top executives and employees. To restore the company to its foundation and principles of customer experience and product quality, Howard shut down all Starbucks stores for an afternoon on the 28th of February 2008. And for the next 3 hours, all baristas were trained on how to craft their signature drinks. It was accounted that this move alone cost an estimate of $7 million worth of sales. Just a year after Howard's takeover as CEO for the second time, Starbucks had terminated over 18,000 jobs in the United States alone. While so unfortunate for many people, this was a necessary move to restore the coffee giant to her former glory. Howard also brought back the fresh ground coffee bean manual espresso machines, which restored the lost romance of watching baristas make your coffee. With amazing foresight into the future, Starbucks also hired its first chief technology officer and introduced the Starbucks loyalty card. This paved way for the company to launch its own app alongside a renewed loyalty program, which is responsible today for more than 30% of the total company sales. That strangely also allowed the coffee company to enter into the banking industry. If you are a regular Starbucks customer, then you might have come across its loyalty program called the Starbucks Rewards. If you are new to how it works, you can add money into a Starbucks Rewards account via a credit card or Starbucks gift card. The prepaid funds in the app can then be used to make payments for in-store items and to earn loyalty points known as stars, which can be redeemed for complimentary drinks or discounts. Within the customer loyalty space, Starbucks has consistently been credited with having one of the best rewards programs with a loyal customer following in the world. Thanks to the massive and growing size of the company and its reputation, customers are not afraid to keep their money in their Starbucks accounts, knowing that they can use it anytime they want. As such, around $10 billion a year is loaded on the Starbucks card program, accounting for almost half of all Starbucks sales. The coffee chain has also overtaken most banks in terms of financial assets. Now at any point in time, there's about $1.7 billion loaded on Starbucks accounts. Now this is huge, considering the fact that 85% of banks in the United States have less than $1 billion in total assets. This illustrates the major player that Starbucks has become in this space. In practice, this also gives them access to huge capital balances that they can use to seek out opportunities in areas such as expansion and operations in ways that other companies can only dream of. Plus, Starbucks also earns profit from breakage. This is a scenario where a customer fails to use deposited funds for one reason or the other. Seriously, the company earned over $164.5 million from breakage alone in 2021. This is close to 10% of all stored value balances. In fact, this potential has created fears in some banks around the world. The chairman of Hana Financial Group, which is one of South Korea's largest banks, expressed that technologies have allowed coffee companies like Starbucks to be our rivals. He said in his New Year's address, it will be fine to call Starbucks an unregulated bank, not merely a coffee company. Another bank official was quoted saying that Starbucks is a fintech firm. Under Howard's leadership for the second time as CEO, Starbucks thrived and witnessed yet another golden age. He also introduced a national loyalty program and started taking advantage of social media to involve more people in his initiatives. The company also launched the My Starbucks Idea campaign as a way to collect ideas from anyone, anywhere. It generated over 70,000 ideas worldwide in its first year alone. Starbucks' stock price climbed up to 1,600% in just 9 years of Howard's return as CEO for the second time. And with quality back on track, Howard resumed the company back on expansion, with China as one of their key target market, of which today they open a new store every 15 hours.
Over 60 million people in more than 50 countries pass through the doors of Starbucks every week.
We're not in the business of filling bellies. We're in the business of filling souls.
In December of 2016, Howard stepped down as the CEO, with confidence that the company's principles of quality had been permanently ingrained once again. Howard Shultz's incredible vision has grown the coffee chain today into an incredible behemoth, worth more than $123 billion, with thousands of stores around the world. But most important of all, Starbucks has managed to stay true to a philosophy of corporate social responsibility and believes that profit should always come second to service.
You can't exceed the expectations of your customers as an enterprise unless you exceed the expectations of your people first.